is that it's not a cultural transmission. In Sanskrit, there's a word vidya, means knowledge. In Thai, the word is vicha, related. And then we have our own modern English word, video. And all of these words come from the Indo-European language root, so that it's culturally transmitted from one area to the other. Miracles happen and are reported from places like Australia with the Aboriginals, from the New World with Native Americans. And that is not a cultural transmission. The belief in miracles does not happen because your father believed in miracles, who got it from his father, who got it from his father, who got it from his father, going all the way back. The belief in miracles is an independent belief that sprang up separately in many different places in the world. And that, to me, removes one of the main objections that skeptical scientists have towards accepting their reality, their validity, is they try to explain it as a cultural transmission. People just believe in that stuff. If you stop believing in things because they're traditional, you wouldn't believe in this stuff anymore, and that doesn't account for why it appears in cultures that never had the opportunity to communicate. So, Bhagwan Das may or may not have picked up the transmission from the brain of his master that would allow him to enter the state in which miracles occur. Miracles, because they involve, according to Buddhaghosa Acharya, the experience of an infinite space in your mind, and that in turn, through quite straightforward neuroscience, implicates the hippocampus on the right side of the brain. That said, we need to put a signal derived from the hippocampus over the right side. And this is more or less the setup that we use for Bhagwan Das and the sessions that he experienced. He had 3 sessions. The Shiva device, the octopus device, involves 16 magnetic coils. This involved 2. So we put it over the right side of his brain, one positive, one negative, so that the fields would run between the 2 coils. And we applied a signal derived from the hippocampus. And this signal, which is got a midline and then going down, shows that the signal is entirely positive. Most neural signals have positive and negative. This one is only positive. And it has the somewhat technical, but not frighteningly so, name of long-term potentiation, meaning a moment of experience being turned into something with a long-term potential. That is to say, something we can remember over the long term. This is a signal like this occurs when the hippocampus is taking present moment experience and turning it into a memory. And again, you can see that the shape of the signal shows how the field will rise, the magnetic field will rise and fall over time. And so this is the signal that we applied to the right side of Bhagwan Das's head. The first of his 3 sessions, he found that he was in the void of Kali. And I had told him, don't think about Kali. If you sit down with your eyes closed and it has to go religious, ponder Confucius, ponder Lao Tzu, ponder a Zen master, but don't think about Kali, because that's not where we're going. And he said, oh, no problem. I love Lao Tzu. Great. So he sat down, and he said that actually for a little while his mind was on very Taoist and Chinese themes. This happened within a minute or 2. Now, when he prayed to Kali, it would usually take him about 5 minutes to go from starting to pluck his stringed instrument and warming up his voice to actually getting into the womb of Kali, as he called it. This time he was in there within a minute, perhaps 2. Now, after his second session, within 2 days, he found himself at an event where he was leading some Hindu worshippers, and he found that he could do Shaktipat, that when people came and asked him for blessings, which consisted of him putting his hands on their head, whereas before he had done it kind of as a ritual action, like Catholic priests do for confirmation. They're not putting the power of God in you when they put their hands on your head during the confirmation ceremony, the coming of age ceremony for Catholics. They're just putting their hands on the head, and God works through them as He will. And it's not a common context for miracles and epiphanies to be reported. But Bhagwan Das was now doing this in his context, and he found that when he did this, a tremendous amount of heat and electrical sensations appeared in his hands, and the people that he touched in this way went into bliss attacks. They would almost collapse in front of him. Their arms would expand, their heads would pull back. He said, I couldn't even keep my grip. They're leaning back. How am I supposed to do this? I said, hey, I only do the neuroscience. Ceremonial stuff is your department, dude. We were very good friends. We were quite informal with one another, enjoyed one another's company immensely. And then he did his third session. And 2 days after, he was at a Hindu temple leading a puja, a worship ceremony for Kali. And he found that when it ended, when it was time for him to do the final ritual acts, which consisted of him putting flowers on an altar, that he wished that he was putting these pink carnations and red carnations and white carnations all around. Very pretty, very traditionally Hindu. But the color of Kali, as shown in the background of this very powerful image, in which she stands on the dead body of her husband, Shiva, is scarlet or vermilion. And he said, now wouldn't it be wonderful if he could find scarlet carnations so that he could actually give the flowers that were Kali's associated color to her as an offering. And for some reason in that moment it seemed like a very delightful, even delicious thing to do. Oh, for a scarlet carnation. And as he leaned down to make the final prostration, when he got up there was a flower in his hands, and it was a scarlet carnation. Now, go to a flower store and try and find one. But he manifested it. Now, this is his story. And I once told this story to a neuroscientist who actually was a graduate student wanting to sign on to be a neuroscientist. And he said, you know, the simplest explanation for that, and in neuroscience we always prefer the simple explanation to the complicated one, which I agree with, is that Bhagwan Das was just hallucinating. And that might be true. Could be a normal garden variety hallucination, except that he would have had to have had a tactile and a visual hallucination at the same time, and it would have ignored the reason, the rationale behind this experimental case history. We were testing a specific thing, transmission of energy from a miracle-performing guru to the disciple, recruiting his void, hippocampal womb of Kali state into his, making it more immediate so that it wasn't just Kali as he saw her from the inside, but actually a dynamic thing, a tool, a vehicle that could be taken out for a ride, and trying to make a specific thing happen. Now, if it weren't for that rationale, if it weren't designed to create a miracle in this case, then the simplest explanation would be preferred. Now, it may be that it was just an hallucination, and if that's the case, we don't have a case history that illustrates performing miracles. We have a case history that illustrates the propensity to report miracles. And that's also a serious step forward in the scientific understanding of miracles. There's a story I like to tell about another class of miraculous event. And just as we saw with the discussion of the octopus and the circumcerebral, the around-the-head stimulation, it's possible for information to be transmitted from one brain to the next. And there was an occasion when I had a girlfriend, and she wanted to break up with me. Why, I can't possibly imagine, but she wanted to. And she came over to my place and said, well, I don't want to do this anymore. I don't want to see you anymore. I want to get another boyfriend. Later on, I actually learned that she had someone all lined up. But I was upset about it, and I went into a really bad state. It was kind of despair sort of thing. And this went on and on for quite a while. And she was upset about it too, partly because she wasn't completely sure that she wanted to end the relationship. And if I would have just been so kind as to say, well, okay, it's over, I got to go get a burrito now, and it had been just that easy about it, it would have been easy for her, but it wasn't. And she got upset. And then something happened. Both of our capacities to stay in a bad mood stopped at the same moment. And suddenly, I saw her head surrounded with a blue aura. And I told her, wow, this is one of the most beautiful things I've ever seen in my life. She said, I'm seeing the same thing around you. And she said, yeah, and it's incredibly beautiful. It's not you. And I said, well, it isn't you either. It's this aura that I'm seeing around you. You know, we would throw potato chips at each other from time to time. It was not a great relationship, but it was a magnificent moment. Something happened. Our brains were sharing information. There was a case involving Shakti, a technology that's in the same family as the Shiva device, but much simpler. And the woman who had done a Shakti session using a signal derived from the amygdala, that burst X, that burst firing signal, actually had a 6-hour episode in which she saw auras around everybody. And there was a group of people who came over to her house that day, and she said, oh, I can't do it was a spiritual discussion group. She says, I can't do the discussion group tonight, I'm in this state. And they said, well, let us try it. So they did, and they each went around the room for 20 minutes. Everyone put this headset on with the same signal over the same areas, and they each went into the same state of consciousness. Now, with unconnected individuals, this would be astronomically unlikely. With this class of technology, people have very individualized experience. What you get is what you get. What another person gets is what they get. You might see God, they might get nothing. And this normal, wide range of response is expected. And here was a group of people who were all having the same experience, one after the other. In the annals of spiritual experience, I've never heard of it. And I've read a lot of books from that field, if I can call it a field. For you and I to both go into a state because we've each been exposed to the blessings of a master, for example. That's normal, but you'll get what you get and I get what I get. But for each one of us to go one after the other, taking turns, all accessing the same altered state is unheard of. What was happening? And the answer, I think, is that the first woman, with her amygdalas very active and clanging away and producing her experience, had far less random activity in her brain, so that her brain was on a narrow track and everybody else was on a wider one. And through the stimulation and through contact with her, it narrowed them down until they were each picking up the state that her brain was broadcasting. And they each went into the same experience. This is the amygdala, the brain part used in that.